Picture this. You wake up to the grinding bellow of cement trucks tearing into a stream that's flowed behind your house since before the Civil War. The stink of diesel exhaust mixing with crushed limestone fills your lungs as you watch $80,000 of your association dues get poured into what used to be a crystal-clear mountain ribbon. It's for flood control, HOA President Camilla Hart declares from her white Tesla. What this real estate agent didn't realize: I'm a retired Army Corps hydrologist and she'd just built herself a countdown clock. Fast forward 6 months. Camilla's 7-figure showplace sits in 2 feet of swampy water, foundation splitting, while my beat-up place stays bone dry. The feds are rapping on her door, and that concrete chute she bragged about is about to cost her everything. What would you do if your HOA stole your cash to wreck your peace? Where are you watching from? I'd wager your neighbors have tried something this unhinged too. My name's Nolan Barrett, 58 years old, and until half a year ago, I figured the biggest threat to my sanity was tracking down carburetor parts for a 1972 Harley Sportster. Turns out I was wrong. The real danger was an HOA board boss who confused a real estate license with a PhD in hydro engineering. I inherited my grandfather's 2-acre slice of heaven in what used to be rural Colorado back when Willowbrook was nothing but cattle pasture and the only HOA meant herd of Angus. My grandfather, Franklin Barrett, was a combat engineer who survived Normandy and came home to build something good. This creek was his therapy. Every morning for 3 years since retiring from the Army Corps of Engineers, I followed the same ritual. Coffee on the back porch, listening to Cottonwood Creek chatter over polished granite, the scent of motor oil from my shop blending with wet willow bark, the sound of hammering echoing across crystal-clear water at dawn, my boots crunching on gravel paths. Granddad set by hand in 1948. Elena, my wife of 26 years, teaches 4th grade and has the patience of a saint, which she'd need for what was coming. Our kids scattered like tumbleweeds. Sophie's saving lives as a trauma nurse in Portland. Evan's debugging software in Austin. Both inherited Granddad's stubborn streak. What made our place special wasn't the 1950s ranch or my cluttered workshop full of vintage bike parts. It was 400 yards of creek with water rights dating to 1873. Older than Colorado statehood, older than electric lights, and definitely older than suburban princesses with attitude problems. Then came Willowbrook Estates, popping up around us like pricey mushrooms after rain. 47 houses, average sticker $900,000. Mostly California refugees fleeing their own HOA fiascos. The irony was thicker than morning mist on the creek. Enter our antagonist, Camilla Hart, 52, HOA board president and self-crowned empress of suburban perfection. Fresh from Marin County with that special blend of entitlement and ignorance that only comes from selling overpriced houses to desperate buyers. White Tesla, vanity plates reading "Sold for you," and those pearl earrings she wore like armor. Her husband's some investment guy commuting to Denver. Kids attend private school where they probably learned that people like me are economically disadvantaged rather than chose different priorities. Their $1.2 million colonial backs right up to my creek. Manicured turf ending where real nature begins. The first shot arrived on a Tuesday morning that smelled like hot coffee and looming legal bills. Official HOA violation notice, certified mail. Unsightly storage of automotive parts visible from neighboring lots violates community aesthetic standards. Fine. $200 per day until compliance achieved. I read it twice. The legal absurdity soaking in like creek water into parched ground. Here's what Camilla's pricey lawyers overlooked. My parcel predates their HOA by 80 years. Granddad's deed included mineral rights, water rights, and a grandfathered exemption from future development restrictions, but they were betting this old mechanic wouldn't know basic property law. The face-to-face went exactly as you'd predict. Camilla's office smelled of vanilla candles and entitlement. She suggested with that practiced smile, realtors perfect and expensive mirrors, that I might be happier somewhere with more flexible standards. Translation: somewhere poor folks belong. I answered with a certified letter explaining that HOA covenants don't apply to grandfathered tracts. Basic real estate law. First lesson when you're dealing with water rights and easements. Her retaliation was fast and expensive. Anonymous complains to the county about illegal business operations because apparently fixing motorcycles looks suspicious to people who pay others to change their oil. A building inspector crawled through my shop for 2 hours, found nothing wrong except my filing system. Still cost me $1,200 in attorney fees, proving I wasn't running a chop shop. But that was just Camilla testing the water, literally and figuratively. The real madness started when she discovered my water rights were complicated in Colorado. Water means power. And in Camilla's world, people like me with calloused hands and grandfathered land don't deserve either. That's when I realized this wasn't about motorcycle parts. This was war. Spring snowmelt was running heavy that year, and Cottonwood Creek sang louder than usual as it rushed over the beaver dam 100 yards upstream. The sound of fast water over granite mixed with the scent of wet willow bark and morning mist rising from the surface. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it became the soundtrack to Camilla's next brilliant legal maneuver. She'd done her homework this time, or thought she had, hiring Keaton Pierce, a Denver firm that specialized in what they politely called environmental property disputes, which is lawyer speak for creative ways to bludgeon neighbors with government rules. Their tactic was ruthless in its elegance. File a nuisance water flow complaint with the county, claiming my land created hazardous runoff that threatened those precious million-dollar houses downstream. The papers landed on a Thursday morning, thick as a Denver phone book and about as helpful. 57 pages of technical jargon saying, in effect, make the old guy prove his 150-year-old creek won't drown our clients' McMansions. They wanted to shove me into a $50,000 environmental impact study, the kind that drags on for 2 years and hires consultants who probably golf with their attorneys on weekends. Elena found me that evening standing knee-deep in the channel, my boots squelching in the muddy bank while I checked flow patterns with Granddad's old survey rod. "What are you thinking?" she asked, using that elementary school teacher tone that meant she could smell trouble brewing. "I'm thinking Camilla's fancy lawyers just made a $50,000 mistake," I said, watching water curl around a boulder Granddad placed by hand in 1953. "And I'm thinking they picked the wrong retired engineer to push around. See, here's something I learned in 30 years with the Corps. Attorneys adore complicated-sounding environmental regs because they assume regular folks won't understand them. What they forget is that some of us design the systems they're trying to weaponize. It's like watching someone explain your own engine to you, the person who built it." I called my old colleague Liam Mercer at the Colorado Division of Water Resources. Took him 10 minutes to spot what Keaton Pierce missed. They'd built their whole complaint on watershed maps from 1967, before the interstate, before half the upstream subdivisions existed, before modern storm drains rewrote the valley's flow patterns. "Nolan," Liam chuckled over the line, "these maps show creek behavior that hasn't existed since Nixon was in office. Want me to send the real surveys? This is going to be embarrassing for them." The modern data told a completely different story. Far from causing trouble, my stretch actually prevented flooding by creating natural retention during spring runoff. Those granite blocks Granddad positioned weren't decoration. The old combat engineer had built flood control before most people knew the term. But here's where it got interesting. Back in engineering school, they drilled us on prior appropriation doctrine. Colorado water law runs on first in time, first in right. Since my family had documented use from 1873, our rights outranked anything filed after that date, including Camilla's entire subdivision, her HOA, and probably her great-grandkids' future complaints. I spent the weekend in my shop, surrounded by Granddad's engineering notebooks and modern county surveys, connecting dots Camilla's team missed. The familiar smell of motor oil mixed with old paper, the scratch of pencil on graph paper. It felt like channeling the old man's ghost. Monday morning, I filed my own complaint with the county. Not just a defense, a counterstrike. I demanded that Camilla's group fund a proper environmental assessment since their harassment relied on fraudulent data. I attached Liam's analysis showing their development actually increased flood risk for everyone downstream. The county water commissioner, a guy named Ruiz, who'd been wrangling water disputes since before Camilla discovered Colorado, took one look at my packet and started laughing. "Mr. Barrett," he said, "these folks just tried to lecture a hydrologist about flow using maps from the Johnson administration. This might be the shortest water rights case in state history." 2 weeks later, total vindication. The county sided with me on every point, ordered the HOA to cease all water-related harassment, and officially validated my historic rights. Suddenly, my claims weren't just grandfathered. They were etched in legal stone. The victory had side effects. The local paper ran the headline, "HOA challenges, century-old water rights, loses spectacularly." Neighbors I'd never met started appearing at my shop door with their own Camilla horror stories. Citations for non-conforming mailboxes, fines for unauthorized garden decor, threats about improper exterior paint. That evening, Elena found me by the creek at sunset, Granddad's fishing rod in my hands with no intention of casting. "This is where he taught me about water," I told her. "How it always takes the easiest path, yet never stops moving toward where it belongs." "And where does this particular water belong?" she asked. I smiled, listening to Cottonwood Creek babble over stones that predated Camilla's lineage by several geological epochs, right through the heart of her perfect little kingdom. You'd think losing a water rights battle would humble someone. You'd be wrong. Camilla Hart must have graduated from the school of doubling down on bad ideas because her next stunt was so audacious it almost impressed me, in the horrifying way watching someone jump off a cliff while shouting about their constitutional right to fly does. 3 weeks after the county told her to stand down, Camilla called an emergency HOA board meeting. Naturally, she scheduled it during the 1 week Elena and I had planned a long overdue trip to visit Sophie in Portland. The meeting notice? Sent to our old address from 2 moves ago, practically guaranteeing we'd miss whatever fresh nonsense she was plotting. The agenda sounded harmless. Emergency flood mitigation assessment. What actually happened was Camilla presenting doctored photographs showing severe erosion damage to HOA land. Pictures that looked suspiciously like they were taken after she'd hired someone to dig holes with a backhoe. She claimed her engineering consultant, who turned out to be her cousin's landscaping contractor, had determined immediate concrete channeling was needed to prevent catastrophic property damage. The vote passed 6-1 with only one dissenter, Edwin Kowalski. Edwin called me in Portland that night, his Polish accent thick with frustration. "Nolan, this woman, she's insane. She says flood will destroy everything if we don't pour concrete into your creek. She has photos, but something stinks." Special assessment, $1,800 per homeowner for emergency flood control infrastructure. Total project cost, $127,000. For work any real engineer could have told them was unnecessary. But Camilla had found her golden hammer, and now every problem looked like a nail begging for concrete. I cut our vacation short and drove through the night, Elena dozing uneasily beside me while I white-knuckled the wheel and calculated how much damage they could do in 72 hours. The answer, plenty. The sound hit me first. Jackhammers and diesel engines growling where bird songs once lived. Then, the smell. Concrete dust mingled with shredded vegetation. Diesel exhaust hung over the valley like industrial fog. I turned onto my driveway and saw what Camilla had done to 150 years of natural beauty. My creek was gone. In its place, a hideous concrete trough that looked more like a prison drainage ditch. Clear mountain water that once danced over smooth stones now crawled through an 18-inch gray gutter that belonged in an industrial park, not the Colorado mountains. They'd buried Granddad's carefully placed boulders under tons of cement, obliterating fish spawning areas that had existed since before Colorado became a state. Elena stood beside me, tears streaming. "They killed it," she whispered. "They actually killed a living creek." But here's the thing about being a hydrologist with 3 decades of regulatory battles behind you. You learn to think like water, and water always finds the truth eventually. I spent the next week documenting everything. Photographs from every angle, flow measurements, chemical samples. More importantly, I dug into Granite Works Construction, the company that did the work. Their record was damning. 3 EPA violations in 5 years, $75,000 in fines for unauthorized waterway modifications, and a pattern of starting work before permits were approved. And here's something every property owner should know. Any major modification to a natural waterway requires clearance from the county, the state environmental agency, and often the EPA. It's like a 3-layer legal cake, and you need a slice from each. Camilla's crew had skipped all 3. The Clean Water Act doesn't play around with unauthorized concrete and destroyed fish habitats. I'd seen cases where violators faced $25,000 per day in federal fines alone, and Colorado's environmental agency could tack on another $10,000 daily. The math was simple. Every day that concrete stayed was another $35,000 in potential penalties. I filed complaints with every agency with jurisdiction: County Code Enforcement, the State Department of Environmental Quality, and the EPA's Region 8 office in Denver. Then I called the local Trout Unlimited chapter. Its president nearly had a stroke when I described the spawning destruction. "Mr. Barrett," he said, "this is exactly the kind of habitat violation we've fought for decades. We'll support you. Legal, financial, technical witnesses. These people just declared war on every fish in Colorado." The counterattack was swift and thorough. Within 10 days, 3 different government agencies had opened investigations. A law clinic at the University of Colorado offered free representation, and I had more than enough documentation to bury Keaton Pierce in their own paperwork. But Camilla wasn't done. Edwin warned me she was planning the next escalation: a full flood control system that would concrete the entire creek from the county road to the subdivision boundary. Her reasoning? If we're going to do this, we might as well do it right. That night, I sat in my shop surrounded by Granddad's engineering notebooks, poring over his 1950s photographs of the natural creek. The old combat engineer had designed something beautiful that had worked flawlessly for 70 years. Camilla had destroyed it in 3 days, but she'd also handed me enough federal violations to put her behind bars. And if you've ever wondered what desperation smells like, it's vanilla candles mixed with fierce sweat in a real estate office at 7 a.m. That's where I found myself 3 weeks later, sitting across from Camilla as she tried to convince me black was white and concrete was natural. "Nolan," she said, sliding a manila envelope across her glass desk, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. This whole situation has been unfortunate." Inside, a cashier's check for $500,000 and a non-disclosure agreement thicker than Granddad's engineering manual. The offer was simple and blatantly illegal. Take the money, agree never to speak publicly about the creek, and relocate out of the county within 6 months. Oh, and sign over my water rights to the HOA for proper management. The threat was barely veiled. Legal battles are expensive, Nolan. Even when you win, you lose. Think about Elena's job security. I'd brought a digital recorder, perfectly legal in Colorado's one-party consent system. Camilla's next words were pure gold. "If you don't take this offer, I'll make sure every property owner in this valley knows you're an anti-development extremist trying to destroy property values. My real estate connections run deep, and your wife's teaching career could become complicated." That same week, my workshop was vandalized again. This time, they weren't subtle. Vintage motorcycle parts scattered across the floor, tools missing, and my restored 1972 Sportster tipped over with sugar poured in the gas tank. But they made a crucial mistake. The new security cameras I'd installed caught everything, including a clear shot of a white Tesla parked at the end of my driveway at 2 a.m. One of the vandals wore $300 sneakers that matched a pair I'd seen on Camilla's 17-year-old son. The psychological warfare escalated daily. Anonymous online reviews began targeting Elena's after-school tutoring business. Unprofessional. Political agenda. Don't trust your children with radicals. Someone even called her principal to question her fitness to teach. The stress gnawed at us. Elena was losing sleep. I was checking my blood pressure twice a day. But here's what Camilla fundamentally misunderstood about engineers. We document everything. Every threat, every act of vandalism, every anonymous complaint was logged with the precision of a federal case file, because that's exactly what it was becoming. The EPA had opened a formal case. The Colorado Attorney General's office sent investigators. Local environmental groups treated this like the Exxon Valdez of suburban creek destruction, and I was gathering allies faster than Camilla was making enemies. Sarah O'Malley, a third-year environmental law student at the University of Colorado, had taken my case as her senior thesis project. While digging through HOA financial records, she uncovered something explosive: a pattern of inflated contracts tied to Camilla's real estate network. "Mr. Barrett," she said, spreading documents across my workbench. This concrete project cost $127,000, but the work was worth maybe $40,000. The rest went to consulting fees and contractor premiums tied to businesses owned by Camilla's associates. Sarah had found smoking guns where I'd only suspected smoke, board meetings held in secret, contracts awarded without competitive bidding, special assessments funding personal vendettas. What began as environmental destruction was morphing into organized fraud. The real revelation came from Granddad's engineering notebooks. While preparing documents for the legal fight, I found a 1973 consulting report he wrote for the county, one that predicted exactly what was happening now. He'd warned against concrete channeling in this location, calculating that it would increase downstream flood risk by 300% during spring runoff. The report contained detailed flow charts, seasonal water tables, and soil absorption rates, everything Camilla's so-called engineering consultant had ignored. More importantly, it proved that someone with actual credentials had studied this issue half a century earlier and reached the opposite conclusion from Camilla's landscaper. That's when the irony hit me. Camilla thought she was solving a flooding problem, but she'd actually created a hydraulic time bomb. Spring snowmelt was 6 weeks away, and the concrete channel would direct every drop of water straight toward the HOA home's foundations. The natural creek had meandered across my property, spreading flow over a wide floodplain that absorbed excess water like a sponge. The concrete channel removed that natural absorption, transforming the flow into a high-pressure water cannon aimed directly at million-dollar basements. I spent the weekend with my calculator, Granddad's charts, and updated weather models. The math was terrifying and beautiful. When the spring floods arrived, and they would, Camilla's concrete monstrosity would convert a manageable water flow into a foundation-destroying torrent. My land, upstream and naturally elevated, would stay bone dry. The HOA homes downstream would flood like a submarine with screen doors. Edwin stopped by Sunday evening, finding me sketching restoration plans at the kitchen table. "Nolan," he said, "this woman Camilla, she is making a huge mistake." "Yes," I replied, glancing at the weather forecast showing heavy snowpack and a wet spring ahead. Then, at Granddad's engineering calculations predicting exactly what would happen when physics collided with stupidity. "Edwin," I said, "she just built the world's most expensive lawsuit." The creek was going to have its revenge, with compound interest. Sarah returned on a gray February morning with a banker's box full of documents and the kind of expression that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Mr. Barrett," she said, setting the box on my workbench with a satisfying thump, "I think you're going to want to sit down for this." For 3 weeks, Sarah had been doing forensic accounting on the HOA's books, following the money trail like a bloodhound with a CPA license. What she found would make the FBI's white-collar crime unit weep with joy. The concrete project that cost homeowners $127,000. Actual cost? Around $40,000. The remaining $87,000 vanished into a maze of consulting fees, emergency premiums, and environmental assessments, leading back to companies tied to Camilla. That wasn't just civil fraud, that was federal racketeering, with sentences measured in years, not months. Then Edwin arrived, clutching a small digital recorder like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Nolan," he said, his accent thick with righteous fury. "Remember I told you I voted against the concrete project? I may have forgotten to mention, I recorded the entire meeting." The recording was devastating. Camilla's voice, clear as mountain water, explained to the board that the real goal wasn't flood control. It was to drive out incompatible residents who don't understand our community vision. She discussed using HOA funds to force me into expensive legal fights, knowing most people couldn't afford to fight back. The best part? Her admission that the project wasn't about flood prevention at all. It was about erasing anything that made the neighborhood look rural or working class. She wanted every trace of the valley's ranching heritage gone to boost property values for her real estate business. But the real bombshell lay in Granddad's consulting folder marked Willowbrook Development Consultation 1973. Inside was a hydrological analysis warning against concrete channeling in this exact location. His calculations showed it would eliminate the creek bed's natural flood absorption, directing 100% of spring runoff toward the downstream development zone, precisely where Camilla's house stood. The report's topographical maps showed my property sat naturally above the flood zone, while the HOA development occupied the traditional overflow basin. Granddad had even recommended against building there, but developers in the 1990s ignored him. One note summed it all up. The creek will reclaim its floodplain eventually. Concrete will only make it angry when it does. Sarah spread the financial evidence across my workbench as I laid out Granddad's engineering predictions. The pattern was clear. Camilla had embezzled nearly $90,000 from her neighbors to build a flood creation device that would destroy their homes while keeping mine safe. This is conspiracy, fraud, environmental destruction, and possibly racketeering, Sarah said, sorting documents into neat legal piles. The EPA violations alone could land her in federal prison. Add the financial crimes and she's looking at serious time. Elena joined us for coffee, studying the evidence with her teacher's eye for patterns. She played herself, she said quietly. Every move she made to hurt us created more evidence against her. Outside, February snow was melting faster than normal, and Cottonwood Creek was starting to run high in its concrete cage. Forecasts predicted the heaviest spring runoff in 20 years. Camilla had built herself a ticking time bomb and handed me everything I needed to convict her when it exploded. The only question now was whether I should warn her neighbors about what was coming, or let physics deliver the lesson Granddad predicted 50 years ago. My workshop had transformed from a motorcycle restoration garage into something that looked like a war room designed by engineers who'd watched too many spy movies. Every surface was buried under maps, legal documents, financial records, and Granddad's engineering drawings. The coffee pot never stopped. The landline rang constantly. Elena started bringing sandwich trays for the steady stream of allies filing through our door. My restored 1972 Harley Sportster sat in the corner, finally finished, a symbol of bringing dead things back to life, which felt appropriate for what we were planning for the creek. Kate Morgan, an environmental attorney from the University of Colorado Legal Clinic, had officially taken my case pro bono after seeing Sarah's evidence. Kate approached environmental law like a chess grandmaster with a grudge. "Nolan," she said, spreading a timeline across my workbench, "we're not fighting one case here. We're fighting 4 simultaneously, and we're going to win them all." The strategy was elegant. A federal case for Clean Water Act violations and habitat destruction. A state case for water rights infringement and permit fraud. A county case for building code violations and illegal special assessments. And a civil case for fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Each reinforced the others like overlapping fields of fire. Even if Camilla somehow escaped one, the other 3 would crush her. And thanks to something called the Private Attorney General Doctrine, we could recover all legal costs if we won. Environmental law actually encourages citizens to sue violators when government agencies are stretched thin. The financial probe had evolved into something both beautiful and terrifying. Sarah recruited 2 more law students and a forensic accounting professor who treated HOA fraud like a fascinating puzzle. They found Camilla's inflated contracts stretched back 3 years. Landscaping, security, legal fees, all tracing back to her business network. Total estimated embezzlement, over $200,000 from homeowner assessments. That wasn't just civil misconduct anymore. That was federal racketeering territory, with prison sentences measured in years. Meanwhile, I was designing the creek restoration using Granddad's original surveys and modern environmental engineering standards. The natural channel plan would prevent flooding and restore fish habitat for about $35,000, less than half of what Camilla had wasted. Colorado Trout Unlimited pledged $25,000. The Sierra Club added $15,000. Local fishing clubs, environmental groups, and even some guilt-ridden HOA members chipped in for what we now called the Cottonwood Creek Redemption Project. Community organizing took on a life of its own. Weekly meetings in my shop drew 30 to 40 people, including veterans who loved seeing a combat engineer's grandson take on bureaucratic stupidity. Elena ran the social media campaign. The #SaveCottonwoodCreek had over 5,000 followers and growing. Dr. Angela Ruiz from Colorado State's Environmental Engineering Department volunteered as our expert witness. She reviewed Granddad's 1973 predictions and confirmed them with modern modeling. The concrete channel would increase flood risk by 400% during heavy snowmelt, directing all that water straight toward HOA foundations. Your grandfather was 50 years ahead of his time, she told me. This is exactly how we design natural flood control today. Camilla didn't just destroy a creek. She destroyed a sophisticated engineering system that protected the whole valley. Our media strategy was coordinated through Kate's office. Local reporters loved the David versus Goliath story, but we focused messaging on environmental protection, not revenge. The story spread beyond Colorado. Environmental law blogs, fishing magazines, even a Denver public television documentary crew. But our secret weapon remained Granddad's historical evidence. His 1950s photos showed how the natural creek handled spring floods for decades without property damage. Those images would devastate Camilla's defense in court, proving the concrete created flood risk rather than preventing it. Weather Service predictions grew more ominous. Heavy snowpack, warmer than normal spring temperatures, and multiple storm systems were converging during peak melt season. The concrete channel was about to face its first real test, and it would fail spectacularly. Edwin became our inside source, reporting on increasingly desperate HOA meetings as board members panicked over legal liability. 3 had already resigned, claiming Camilla misled them. The timeline accelerated. The federal EPA opened a formal investigation. The county DA announced a criminal probe into HOA finances. The state environmental agency issued emergency cease and desist orders. Multiple class action lawsuits popped up from other HOA victims across Colorado. Elena and I spent evenings walking the concrete-scarred creek, planning its resurrection, the sound of water fighting its unnatural confinement, the smell of concrete curing in mountain air. It was ugly, but temporary. "How long until we can bring it back to life?" she asked. I ran the math on flood cycles, legal timelines, and construction schedules. "By next spring," I said, "this creek will be more beautiful than Granddad ever imagined, assuming we survive this spring first." Desperation has a smell. Vanilla air freshener, fierce sweat, and scorched bridges. That's what filled Camilla's real estate office at 6:47 a.m. on March 3rd when she summoned me for what felt more like a hostage negotiation than a meeting. "Nolan," she said, sliding another envelope across her desk, "I think we can find a mutually beneficial solution." Inside was a cashier's check for $750,000 and a non-disclosure agreement that would make the CIA proud. Take the money, leave Colorado, transfer my water rights to a conservation trust controlled by the HOA, and never speak publicly about the case again. The threat was thinly veiled. Legal battles destroy families. Nolan, ask Elena how her teaching career would survive if the school board heard about her husband's radical activism. I had my digital recorder again. Camilla's next words were prosecutorial gold. "If you don't take this final offer, I'll make sure every contractor, every supplier, every business owner in this valley knows you're a troublemaker who costs people money. Your wife's tutoring business, your motorcycle hobby, your reputation, gone. I have connections you can't imagine." That night, my workshop was hit again. This time, they weren't just stealing. They were sending a message. My completed Harley was tipped over, its frame bent, 40 hours of restoration gone. Granddad's engineering notebooks were scattered across the floor, some pages torn, others soaked with oil. But the upgraded security cameras captured everything. 2 figures in hoodies vandalizing my property, followed by a white Tesla with vanity plates picking them up at 2:17 a.m. One of the vandals wore the same sneakers Camilla's son favored. The smear campaign ramped up. Anonymous reviews bombed Elena's tutoring business. Unprofessional. Dangerous political extremist. Someone created fake social media accounts spreading lies about my military service, claiming I'd been dishonorably discharged for mental instability. The school principal called Elena in to discuss concerns about her husband's erratic behavior. 3 parents canceled tutoring after receiving anonymous letters warning them about a radical extremist in education. But Camilla underestimated us again. Every threat, Every review, every act of vandalism was documented in a file that would impress federal investigators, because that's what they were now. Agent Lisa Park from the FBI's White Collar Division opened a formal investigation into the HOA's financial fraud. Agent Tom Ruiz from the EPA's criminal unit built a case around the environmental violations. Sarah's forensic accounting gave them a roadmap to nearly $200,000 in embezzled funds. The pressure was showing in Camilla's erratic behavior. Edwin reported screaming matches with board members during meetings, accusing them of betrayal. 2 more members resigned, leaving only Camilla and 1 loyalist managing a subdivision in total meltdown. Meanwhile, spring snowmelt accelerated. March temperatures were 15 degrees above average. The National Weather Service issued flood watches for the entire Front Range. Cottonwood Creek was already running at 150% of normal flow, and peak melt was still 6 weeks away. I spent evenings measuring flow and documenting how the concrete handled increased volume. The results were exactly what Granddad predicted. Instead of dispersing water across a broad floodplain, the concrete focused 100% of the flow into a high-pressure stream aimed directly at HOA homes. Dr. Ruiz's simulations showed that during peak floods, water velocity in the channel could undermine foundations. Insurance companies began asking questions about unauthorized drainage modifications, changes that could void flood coverage entirely. Community support swelled beyond anything I imagined. Local businesses displayed "Support Nolan" signs. The high school environmental club adopted the creek restoration as their senior project. Veterans groups treated the case like an attack on one of their own. Regional fishing and environmental groups turned my fight into a symbol of grassroots resistance against HOA tyranny. But Camilla wasn't done. Edwin warned she was planning something desperate for the next board meeting. Maybe hiring private security to protect HOA assets, or trying for a restraining order to label me a threat. That night, Elena found me in the shop studying flood forecasts and Granddad's calculations by lamplight. "How bad is it going to be?" she asked. I stared at the snowpack data, the concrete channel's flow rates, and topographical maps showing where all that pressurized water was headed. "Bad enough to end this permanently," I said. "One way or another." The call came at 5:23 a.m. on March 15th. Edwin whispering like he was in a spy thriller. "Nolan, you need to know. Camilla. She's packing a moving truck. Big one. Middle of the night. Very suspicious." I threw on clothes and drove past her house as the sunrise painted the mountains gold. Sure enough, a commercial moving truck was in her driveway while she supervised the loading of expensive furniture. Her Tesla was already packed. The woman who'd spent 6 months trying to drive me out was planning her own retreat. But not before one last desperate gamble that was either brilliant or insane. Sarah called an hour later with news that made my coffee taste like acid. "Mr. Barrett, Camilla just filed for an emergency restraining order, claiming you've been stalking her family and making terrorist threats against HOA property. She's asking for federal protection under anti-domestic terrorism statutes." The legal papers were a masterpiece of fiction. According to Camilla's sworn affidavit, I was a disgruntled veteran with anger issues, conducting surveillance on HOA families and threatening to sabotage infrastructure. She even included photos of me taking water flow measurements as suspicious reconnaissance. The hearing was scheduled for the same day as peak spring melt, a coincidence or proof that she knew exactly how doomed she was. That afternoon looked like a military operation, if military ops involved lawyers, accountants, and furious fish biologists. Kate arrived with a legal brief thick enough to stop bullets. Dr. Ruiz brought real-time flood data showing what was coming. "Nolan," Kate said, spreading documents across my table, "she's trying to tie up the legal system until after flood season. If she gets a restraining order that keeps you away from the creek during the flood, there won't be any witnesses to document what happens." The Weather Service upgraded the alert to a flash flood warning. Snowpack was melting faster than predicted, and multiple storms were converging. Cottonwood Creek was already running at 200% of normal flow, with peak conditions days away. But Camilla made a critical error. The restraining order required her to testify under oath about her claims, meaning she'd have to explain her surveillance allegations while prosecutors had recordings of her offering bribes and threatening witnesses. Agent Park had been building her case for weeks, following the money trail through Camilla's business network. The embezzlement charges were airtight, nearly $200,000 stolen through fraudulent contracts and kickbacks. Add in witness intimidation, bribery, and environmental crimes, and Camilla was looking at serious federal time. The night before the hearing, I sat in my shop cleaning Granddad's service revolver. Not because I expected trouble, but because some rituals help you think. The creek was roaring now, spring melt turning the concrete channel into a high-pressure cannon aimed at million-dollar foundations. Elena found me at midnight, studying flood projections by lamplight. "Tomorrow changes everything, doesn't it?" she asked. "One way or another," I said, listening to water fight against concrete. "Either the legal system works or physics teaches the lesson." The media frenzy reached a fever pitch. Denver news stations planned live coverage of both the court hearing and the flood. Environmental blogs turned my case into a symbol of citizen activism. The hashtag #HashConcreteVisNature trended nationally. Sarah discovered Camilla's family had already purchased a house in Florida. Bank records showed liquidated investments, closed accounts, and asset transfers, proof of premeditated flight. Edwin reported that the final HOA meeting was chaos. Only Camilla and one ally attended, while panicked homeowners demanded answers about flood insurance and legal liability. Several families had already filed suit against the HOA for unauthorized modifications that voided coverage. "Nolan," Edwin said, "she's made herself the enemy of everyone, even those who supported the concrete project. They see now she was lying." The irony was perfect. Camilla had spent months trying to turn the community against me. Her own greed did the job instead. She'd isolated herself so completely that even her allies were running for cover. Tomorrow, federal court would decide whether environmental law could shield citizens from HOA tyranny. But spring floods don't wait for verdicts. Physics was about to deliver its own. The federal courthouse in Denver was packed tighter than a sardine can on March 22nd, with overflow crowds watching live streams and news crews swarming outside. Judge Martha Whitaker, known for her fierce enforcement of environmental law, presided over what local media dubbed the Creek War Trial. Environmental groups filled half the gallery. Veterans claimed another section. Families battling their own HOAs packed the rest. Outside, spring melt was pushing Cottonwood Creek to dangerous levels. Inside, Camilla Hart was about to learn that karma compounds interest. Kate's opening statement was surgical. "Your Honor, this case represents the deliberate destruction of a century-old ecosystem to satisfy one woman's vendetta against a neighbor who refused to bow to her authority. The defendant didn't just violate environmental law. She embezzled nearly $200,000 from her community to fund this destruction." Camilla's attorney, a nervous associate from Keaton Pierce, tried to paint me as a radical blocking legitimate development. His voice cracked when he claimed the concrete channel was necessary flood infrastructure, approved by qualified contractors. Then Kate played the recordings. The courtroom fell silent as Camilla's voice filled the air, offering bribes and threatening Elena's career. Gasps rippled when Edwin's recording revealed her true motivation: driving out incompatible residents to boost property values. "Your Honor," Kate said, "the defendant's own words prove this was never about flood control. This was about weaponizing HOA power to conduct economic cleansing." My testimony was straightforward. 30 years of flood control experience explained simply. I presented Granddad's 1973 report predicting exactly what would happen if concrete replaced natural absorption. Computer animations showed how the channel directed 400% more water toward HOA homes during peak flow. But the real bombshell came when Dr. Ruiz presented real-time flood data. Creek flow was approaching record levels as we sat in court, and the concrete was performing exactly as Granddad predicted, like a fire hose aimed at million-dollar basements. "Your Honor," Dr. Ruiz testified, "this installation poses an imminent public safety threat. During peak conditions, which are happening now, water velocity will undermine foundation stability." The judge called a 30-minute recess when the National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency. Court officers evacuated the lower level while emergency crews scrambled across the valley. When we reconvened, Camilla looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her lawyer was frantically checking his phone, probably getting updates from the disaster she created. That's when Kate dropped the mic. Your Honor, while we've been in session, the defendant's concrete channel has begun flooding the very homes it was meant to protect. Emergency crews are pumping water from basements in Willowbrook Estates, while Mr. Barrett's property upstream and naturally elevated remains bone dry. Live helicopter footage confirmed it. Water was backing up behind Camilla's concrete choke point, flooding foundations while my shop stood dry on higher ground. Camilla's meltdown was caught by every camera. She accused me of orchestrating the flood, claimed environmentalists had weaponized the weather, and demanded federal protection from my eco-terrorist conspiracy. Judge Whitaker's patience snapped. Miss Hart, control yourself or be held in contempt. The court has heard enough. FBI agents served additional warrants during lunch, seizing financial records tied to the racketeering probe. EPA officers secured the concrete sites as crime scenes. State investigators arrived with evidence of HOA fraud across multiple developments. The afternoon session was a formality. Judge Whitaker ruled fully in my favor. Clean Water Act violations, water rights infringement, fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She ordered immediate removal of all concrete, full creek restoration, and $750,000 in damages, including attorney fees and punitive awards. More importantly, she set legal precedent protecting water rights from HOA overreach, creating a framework for others to fight back. The press conference outside felt like a victory parade. Environmental lawyers called it a landmark case. Veterans presented me with a Community Service Award. Students from the high school environmental club handed Elena thank you cards. But the real victory was simpler. That evening, as emergency crews pumped water from Camilla's basement and contractors prepared to free my grandfather's creek, I stood on the porch with Elena and listened to water flowing where it belonged. Justice sounds like running water, she said. And for the first time in months, that water was free. 6 months later, you wouldn't recognize Cottonwood Creek, where ugly concrete once imprisoned flowing water. A natural channel now winds through restored banks lined with native willows and wildflowers. The sound that wakes me every morning isn't the harsh scrape of water fighting concrete. It's the gentle babble of a creek remembering how to be itself. The restoration became a community effort that would have made Granddad proud. Local contractors donated equipment and labor. High school students planted native vegetation as a biology project. Even remorseful former HOA members showed up with shovels and checkbooks. The smell of fresh earth and mountain water replaced concrete dust and diesel fumes. Elena and I spend evenings walking the restored banks, watching native trout spawn again in gravel beds buried for months. Children fish where concrete trenches once scarred the landscape. The broader impact rippled outward like stones in water. Colorado's legislature passed what environmental groups nicknamed Nolan's Law, strengthening property rights against HOA overreach and requiring environmental impact studies before altering natural waterways. Law schools from Stanford to Harvard now teach the Barrett Creek case as a model of citizen environmental enforcement. The $750,000 judgment funded the restoration, paid legal fees, and left enough to endow the Franklin Barrett Environmental Engineering Scholarship at Colorado State. The first recipient? Sarah O'Malley, now an EPA enforcement attorney. Camilla's fate was anticlimactic after all that. She pled guilty to federal fraud and received 18 months in minimum security prison, 3 years probation, and full restitution to HOA victims. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, her assets seized to pay damages, and her family quietly relocated to Florida. The concrete company's owner got 2 years and $2 million in fines. 3 former HOA board members were sentenced to probation and community service, restoring damaged waterways across the state. Edwin Kowalski was elected HOA president unanimously and implemented new bylaws requiring environmental review for all future projects. But the real transformation was deeper than legal victories. Willowbrook evolved from a gated cluster of strangers into an actual neighborhood. The annual Creek Festival now draws thousands who come to see what grassroots activism can achieve. My shop is back to its original purpose, restoring vintage bikes and teaching kids about engines, water flow, and the importance of standing up to bullies. The walls are covered in thank you letters from homeowners fighting similar battles nationwide. Elena returned to teaching with new curriculum on watershed protection and citizen action. Her students' creek restoration projects have won regional science fairs and attracted university researchers. The Cottonwood Creek Redemption Project is now a model replicated in dozens of communities where developers and HOAs damaged waterways. Federal agencies use our case study in training, showing how citizen enforcement can accomplish what overworked regulators sometimes can't. Just last week, I got a call from a homeowner in Arizona facing a nearly identical creek disaster. As I listened to her story, concrete channels, embezzled funds, intimidation campaigns, I realized this fight is bigger than one creek in Colorado. Elena and I are considering turning our workshop into a resource center for environmental self-defense. But for now, it's enough to sit on the back porch at sunset listening to Granddad's Creek sing its ancient song while Elena reads letters from supporters across the country. Home isn't just where your house sits. It's where your values are protected and your community thrives. So here's my challenge to you. If you've got an HOA nightmare brewing in your neighborhood, drop it in the comments. You might be surprised how many legal options you have when petty tyrants try to destroy something beautiful. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because next week we're covering the HOA that tried to ban vegetable gardens, and the 73-year-old grandmother fought back with the Constitution and won. Sometimes the best revenge against bullies is patience, preparation, and letting nature reclaim what was always hers. We appreciate you spending your time with us here on HOA Stories, where HOA egos finally get checked. If you enjoyed today's saga, hit like, comment with your favorite part, and subscribe so you'll be first to catch our next HOA showdown.